Right, so for some reason, Keir Starmer breaking his word and binning yet more policy is found to be newsworthy once again, but I almost think the news programmes are having fun with him now. Ben Shephard, for example, on Good Morning Britain, giving a rundown of all the time Starmer has broken his word. He's honestly looked at Boris Johnson by this point, I think, and said, "Hold my beer." Labour conference in 2021 was all about Labour's green policy. It has been Labour's flagship policy for 3 years now. The entire theme of that year's conference was a fairer, greener future. The policy promising capital spending of £28 billion a year every year until 2030. Yet now, as predictable as it is pathetic, and all following the news that the planet has for the first time in its history exceeded 1.5 degrees in global warming in a 12-month period, Keir Starmer and his George Osborne in waiting Chancellor of a Chancellor Rachel Reeves have ditched it entirely, saying it is now unaffordable, when unaffordability has been the biggest lie in UK politics for the last 45 years, and simply shows a display of contempt towards people who understand basic economics, and showing Starmer quite obviously doesn't. Right, so the flagship green policy of the Labour Party was actually a half-decent proposal. It showed Labour took climate change seriously, or so we thought. But in actuality, it's been nailed on that this was going to get binned at some point, especially after Starmer came out with his now infamous "I hate tree huggers" line, which clearly showed how much interest he really had on the matter, when it is the biggest political issue of our time. I am heartily sick and tired, sick to death, of this not being taken seriously, and it is really insulting that for 3 years this has possibly kept people hanging in there with Labour, not just on the left either, because climate change transcends traditional political lines. This isn't solely a left-wing issue, and being so lazy as to just blame the Tories spending for it, which is what the Tories spent years blaming Labour after all for, to the point people started groaning every time that note saying there was no money left got brought up by a Tory politician on TV. We all remember them, we've all seen it, we all got fed up with it, didn't we? It was a dishonest finger of blame people mostly agree on now. So why are we not already groaning at Labour playing the same card here? That note, that belief this country can run out of money, is a widely held one amongst the public, but every time a politician of whatever party brings such a notion up, they either don't understand economics themselves, or more likely they do, they're just blatantly lying to you about it. I'll come back to that a little bit more in a moment though. For those who haven't heard anything beyond the line on the news of Labour's £28 billion green prosperity policy on the news, here's what the policy actually was supposed to intend to deliver. UK housing stock is amongst the coldest, oldest and draftiest anywhere in Western Europe, a known fact. There's also not enough of it, a consequence of repeated lack of investment. Better insulation, a campaign of insulating all homes to a reasonable standard, would not only make these homes warmer, but energy costs would go down too, as well as emissions, as drafty houses account for 17% of national global warming emissions, according to Greenpeace. Warmer housing, cheaper bills, helping the environment, that's 3 big ticks there, isn't it? On transport, the electric vehicle infrastructure of the country will be heavily invested in to make owning an electric vehicle cheaper and easier to run, along with the investment to electrify more buses and trains. On energy security, there will be more investment on green energy technologies, which are woefully inadequate right now, with more wind, solar and tidal power, along with the necessary upgrades to the national grid and that sham of an idea that was GB Energy, which would have supplied energy to the same suppliers that have been scalping us all over the last 18 months with greedflation. All this would work alongside more traditional measures, though, including tree planting and flood defences. All in all, it sounded good. It was positive. But you were daft to think Labour under Starmer would ever deliver it, and indeed, so it comes to pass. The so-called self-proclaimed Green Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, that's what she called herself when she announced all of this policy back in 2021, couldn't hide her glee now to be binning it. Though what has happened to Ed Miliband to stop him speaking out about all this? He is the shadow energy minister, isn't he? I don't know, this was supposed to be his thing. But no resignation from him, not a peep from him. Have they got him locked up in a chest somewhere? At any rate, this is what Labour have decided they can no longer deliver, because it has been rendered unaffordable by the Tories. Houses will remain uninsulated, drafty, expensive to heat and wasteful as well, harming the environment. We'll continue to be reliant on fossil fuels, continue to be at the mercy of the energy giants, not that renationalisation was still on the table even under this deal. And rather than be honest about the economy, Starmer and Reeves just carry on the same decades-old Thatcherite lie that we can somehow run out of taxpayers' money to fund stuff. It's not true. It never was true. I've spoken about basic national economics in past videos, and functionally, we can print as much money as we like to pay for whatever we want, as long as the tax take balances that to stop inflation rising. Taxation is simply a brake on inflation. That is all taxation does. It destroys new money that gets created and spent by the government in effect. Taxation does not pay for a single thing. Reeves is a banker. She knows this, even if Starmer doesn't get economics. And we know he doesn't. It's been remarked upon numerous times over the last several years. So the reality of the situation is that Labour don't want to spend on this. They'd rather spend on something else. And having already ruled out wealth taxes and increased taxation on the rich, and knowing how badly they want to suck up to big business and wealthy donors, it seems likely that Starmer and Reeves would much rather spend on tax cuts or some such, like the good little Tories they are. Ben Shephard on GMB, I mentioned him a moment ago, put Labour's litany of U-turns on the back of this latest one, or a selection of them, he didn't have all day after all, to former Blairite Labour MP Jackie Smith. He spoke to her about the U-turns that Labour have done, and he spoke about the wealth tax and tuition fees and the charitable status of private schools and the nationalisation of public services that Starmer had gone back on his word on. All of this, as well as now on his green prosperity policy. And Smith's response really did sum up the attitude of Starmeroids in the Labour leadership, the contempt they have for all of us, frankly, because she sneeringly responded by saying, "I'm not sure any serious Labour politician ever said they were going to renationalise." A barbed jibe at Corbyn and those supporting him, still living rent-free in their heads as he does. But on a piece of absolute comedy gold, Ian Dale of LBC, who Smith was sat next to, dryly responded to her snotty comment, well, Keir Starmer did during the Labour leadership contest. In fact, all the candidates did, via show of hands on the matter, knowing it's a vote winner. But how many meant it? Certainly not Starmer. In fact, he's just made possibly the most execrable response to this U-turn ever. He said in an interview, "Every single commitment I have made is fully funded and remains in place, except for warm homes, which unfortunately will have to be carried out a little more slowly. What won't now happen is that we won't make further or new investment decisions, and that means that we won't reach the £28 billion envisaged, and that figure is effectively stood down. The reason for that is because since we announced the £28 billion, the Tories have done terrible damage to our economy. Not just the Liz Truss budget, but also now the government is briefing that it is going to max out on the government's credit card." Every single commitment he made is fully funded and remains in place, eh? There are 10 leadership pledges. I don't know if you might remember them, Starmer. You kind of made them when you ran to be Labour leader, that have now been binned in their entirety, and they call you a liar all day long. Also, there is no government credit card. There is effectively a magic money tree that you can shake as much cash out of as you like, so long as taxation can balance it, and it's called the Bank of England. Starmer and Reeves plan to place restrictions on spending because you can't tax the less well-off more. They can't tax us more. They can't tax the ordinary working-class people of this country more than they already are, because we are already overburdened by taxation. But they won't, by choice, hit the rich with taxation that have woefully underpaid on their taxes, been undercharged on their taxes for too long, thanks to having invested heavily, it seems, on buying political influence with that money instead. Wealth inequality is greater than it has ever been in UK history. And what this Labour narrative is screaming to me is that is just going to continue under a Starmer-led government. Worse, Starmer calls this his plan for growth. Where? Out of what? The longer you leave this investment in green energy, in green policy, in battling the effects of climate change, the more expensive it will ultimately be, because the more damage will be wrought by it and by global warming. This isn't a plan for growth. This is a plan for disaster in the making. This is kicking the can down the road. Andrew Fisher, Jeremy Corbyn's former policy chief, so someone who knows something about what makes for a actual transformative policy for change and what doesn't, had this to say on it.
I think if you run away from debate at every corner, people think you're weak. And I think that's how Starmer looked yesterday. He's been talking about this for nearly 3 years, since 2021 when it was launched. And now all of a sudden it's unaffordable, like he's just woken up in the last week and realised that. It's not. If you look at what other countries are doing around the world, the US with Biden's Inflation Reduction Act, lots of other countries are investing far larger sums than Labour was proposing to and are still doing it, still carrying on, and they're getting better growth as a result. So it's bad for the economy, bad for the environment, and actually bad for our bills, because a lot of that money was on home insulation about bringing down our bills, reducing the cost of energy. So it's bad news for everyone.
Does he lose some votes in the election from people on the left?
I don't know about on the left necessarily, but it's certainly people who are environmentally concerned, which is much broader than just the left, I think, politically. I think we'll move to the Greens and think that's the better option. And I think it just demotivates people a lot, because a lot of people had got behind this policy, were enthusiastic about it. You see a lot of criticism as well from unions and from industry as well. Jürgen Meyer, who's the former head of Siemens Engineering, criticising it quite strongly as well. So it's alienated a lot of people.
And of course, Andrew Fisher's right here. It does make Starmer look weak. It is economically illiterate. It is going to cost us all more in our heating bills. And for anyone who did get excited by this policy, it's a massive betrayal. Fisher also made mention of other countries still investing in green tech, green policy, green energy, meaning we're going to fall behind with that. It's so short-sighted and so frustrating. If only there was a party here in this country that takes this issue as seriously as these others do in other nations. Oh, hang on, we do. The one party the mainstream media perpetually pretend doesn't exist, the Green Party. They weren't pledging £28 billion a year and not meaning it. They're pledging £100 billion a year. I mean every single word in their Green New Deal, which made the manifesto in 2019 and still stands as party policy to this day. By all means, visit the Green Party website to read up on this in more detail. I could do a video just on it, frankly. But the executive summary of it reads, "To tackle the climate emergency and deliver social justice, we propose the Green New Deal. The Green New Deal will invest in our shared future, funding improvements in energy, including the replacement of fossil fuels with renewable energy, housing, including the provision of better insulation for all homes that need it, the delivery of major heating upgrades for 1 million homes a year, and the creation of 100,000 new energy-efficient council homes a year. Transport, including the delivery of a public and sustainable transport revolution, which will allow people to travel cheaply and safely on new trains, buses, cycleways and footpaths. Industry, including support for businesses to decarbonise and the provision of training to give people skills to access millions of new green jobs. Food farming and forestry, including the planting of 700 million trees and support for healthy and sustainable food and farming systems. Incomes, including the creation of a universal basic income paid to all UK residents to tackle poverty and give financial security to everyone. New green homes, new green transport and new green jobs will get us on track to reduce the UK's carbon emissions to net zero by 2030 and provide new opportunities for everyone to live happier and more secure lives. This will be a combined investment of over £100 billion a year in the Green New Deal, with an additional investment in universal basic income." It rubbed Labour's offer as it stood in the mud. It's brave, forward-thinking policy. And now it does even more so rub their faces in the mud, because this is literally the only UK party now taking climate change seriously. Starmer thinks we're all stupid, and contrary to keeping his word on everything except this, as he's tried to tell us, he's binning it all instead. Another big reason for this is apparently he's scared of the Tories being mean to him. Oh, so sensitive. You better not watch this video here then. I've been no kinder to him for his cowardice. Do watch it next, and I'll hopefully catch you on the next vid. Cheers, folks.